Today's conveyancing clients expect speed, clarity, and frequent updates. But tight margins and rising client expectations put pressure on conveyancing practices. With smart automation and clear workflows, Leap helps conveyancing teams spend less time on admin and more time supporting their clients. Learn more at leap.co.uk.
You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello, welcome along to a special edition of the Today's Conveyancer podcast, because we're releasing this as part of National Conveyancing Month, which we're currently in. I mean, we're not at the point of recording, but National Conveyancing Month is for the duration of March, and it's an opportunity really for conveyancers to take control of their destiny, I suppose. We've always said that National Conveyancing Week and National Conveyancing Month was all about conveyancers raising their profile, being much clearer with consumers and with other parts of the transaction about the importance of their role. And I mean, who better to talk about this with than somebody who lives and breathes conveyancing, Janine Wellington, Managing Director of Convey Law. Great to have you on the podcast, Janine.
Thank you. Great to be here, Dave. Yeah.
In the first instance, it's always nice to get a bit of background from our guests. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your plotted conveyancing history.
Plotted conveyancing history. Okay, so went to law school, as like many others, 25 years ago or so, qualified into the legal profession, very much a fee earner in conveyancing from day one. Worked my way up in high street firms and corporate firms to become a partner. I've had various roles of head of departments, and that's residential conveyancing and also commercial and property. So a mixed bag, really. I'd worked at Convey Law back around 2013, 2014 as one of their fee earners, and I'd left for the bright lights somewhere else, but was very much drawn back in around 4 years ago now. I came back as a legal director and was appointed MD of the business a year ago, January.
Part of National Conveyancing Month is all about encouraging people into the industry. How do we get new recruits into the sector? It's a conversation that we've had at length through our joint involvement in the Conveyancing Foundation. And I know it's a challenge that both Convey face, as does the whole of the sector. I mean, I'm not sure there are a lot of people in your shoes who are, even leading conveyancing businesses who might encourage their children to go into conveyancing. I mean, that's certainly something that I've heard said by conveyancers to me. I mean, is that dare I ask you, is that your view?
I think it probably is, actually. My son has just completed his SQE and is in London about to start his training contract, and he wants to stay completely away from property and conveyancing. And I think that's probably having seen me go through what I have over the last 20 years. So, and there is definitely something to be said for that. But actually what we need to do as leaders in the industry and as leaders of businesses is galvanise those trainees and pull them together to show them that it can present and can be a great career, but it has to be done right. And I think we've probably fallen a little bit short of that over the last decade in getting our trainees and junior conveyancers to where they need to be. Obviously, it doesn't help with the additional pressures that are coming onto us and through us day by day, week by week, month by month at the moment. But ultimately, it's something that I really feel strongly about, especially at Convey, in allowing our more junior staff to be able to have that clear career progression plan, assisting and supporting them to actually make them into great conveyancers, because there's conveyancers and then there's great conveyancers. And I find, unfortunately, at the moment, we're probably outweighing, even though there's still not a lot of them, conveyancers over great conveyancers. So it's something that I really hold dear to my heart in wanting to change, because it can be great when it's done properly.
I always see that, I mean, organizations like Convey, which employs, what, 100, 150 staff?
Yeah, 150 odd. Yeah.
There is a clear sort of opportunity and
Mhm.
progression in much
Yes.
larger organizations. And perhaps we'll get on to how you sort of nurture talent and that kind of thing in the
Yes.
course of the discussion. But it's so much more difficult for much smaller organizations
Hmm.
who don't have that resource to enable junior
Hmm.
staff to learn from the ground up. I mean, often it's well, throwing people into the fire, isn't it? Quite often.
Yeah, it's time, it's money, and it's technology, really. And the smaller firms certainly don't always have those three things. You usually find managing directors or partners of smaller firms are very much feeing in themselves.
Mm.
I don't do that at the moment. I assist on complex matters, but I don't have a caseload. So I have time there to be able to strategize and help our training. And it's money. Ultimately, you usually have to put some aside for training resources. And again, the smaller firms might not always have that available. And it's technology. I have lots of friends who are in smaller firms who are really still running on very old case management systems, not even thought about AI. And we're doing all of those things at Convey. Our processes and procedures allow us to be able to put our trainees in the best position to be able to convey property in the next 10 years, because it's certainly on the change, and it's certainly going to be completely different in the next 5 years, I think.
I want to come on to risk and process and all that kind of thing,
Yeah.
but we'll just, before we do, what do you make of the conversation point about the difference that COVID made in terms of working from home,
Hmm.
working in the office, that whole, I mean, it's been described to me as learning by osmosis, actually sitting next to the partner or the fee earner and taking on board their demeanor on the phone, the way in which they're doing things, and having somebody there to ask questions of. I mean, you're nodding along. It's obviously an issue you recognise.
Oh, absolutely, because that's exactly how I trained. I sat with a partner when I left university, and I watched how they spoke on the phone. They gave me 10, 15 minutes on a file whenever I needed it, because I was sat there and I could openly ask those questions and ultimately interrupt them, of course, but not always having to pick up the phone or dial in a number on a screen to get a video call, which is what a lot of our trainees have to do today prior to COVID. After COVID, should I say. If you look at Convey, 30% of our staff work in the office,
Mm-hmm.
30% of them are remote, and then 40% are hybrid. So we are quite lucky in that we've got a 70% kind of ratio where we see our colleagues for a few days each month. There's only 30% of them that are totally remote, and we have to rely on being able to share screens to carry out training sessions with them, which we do. We do that at least twice a month with all of our conveyancers and assistants. But we've had to adapt and we've had to change, and it's certainly not easy. It's certainly not easy creating a culture when you have hybrid and remote workers, let alone allowing them and enabling them to train in the way in which they deserve and you want.
Is that a deliberate policy on the part of the business to have 70% of your staff office
No.
based in some way?
Yeah, no, it's not deliberate. Ultimately, we are very flexible in how you can work for us at Convey. So we never say no to anyone, irrespective of where you sit in the country. But we do recognise that for those that are remote, we have to change the way in which we do things. So we're constantly strategizing about how we can involve them daily, and what that means to us as a business, and how we can organically grow from a workforce that is never going to be at the office.
Mm. I mean, do you find that you're able to promote from within? I mean, you've made a
Yeah.
rather pointed statement about good conveyances and
Yes.
conveyancers. I mean, that presents challenges from a staff turnover point of view, presumably as well. But there is a sort of clear pathway. And have you got any ideas or any statistics around the numbers of staff that you've brought through the business over the years?
So we have 10, if we have at least 10 chiefs, so who are our conveyancing managers, who are our top level fee earners, all have a number of files each. If I look at those 10, every single one of them are homegrown through us, has generally been with the business between 5 and 10 years. There's been others that have been less successful that have come in and just not been able to perhaps cope with the volume, because it does take a certain kind of person to be a conveyancer. You have to be tenacious, you have to be resilient, and even you may want those things, your demeanor just may not allow for it. We do train on those things now as well, actually, because we've realized that tenacity and resilience are major factors in making a conveyancer into a great conveyancer. But yes, organic growth is huge for us in the Convey group. That's where we see our success. We have the Convey Law Pathway, which we can go through if you wanted to, but that's very much based on 4 sets of different modules, and that's a task list. How do you become a great assistant? So all of our conveyancers will start, unless they come in already experienced, they will come in as a conveyancing assistant to one of our conveyancers. They will carry out a number of modules within that conveyancer task list group. Then they have the practical modules that they sit, which cover off regulatory matters, risk and compliance, practical documents, accounting, knowing what an office account is, knowing what a client account is. Then they have the academic modules. So again, what I recognised from having studied the law, that conveyancers can often know the process and know how to do something, but not necessarily understand why. So they don't understand the land law that perhaps sits behind that part of the transaction. So we cover off the English legal system, contract law, land law, family law, private client law, all little bits that actually interwove with a conveyancing transaction. And then last but not least, we have the Convey culture principles module group, where, it's focusing on equality and diversity, healthy habits. How do you bring your best self into work every day? How do you look after yourself? Because we have a certain responsibility, of course, to enable our conveyancers to be the best that they can be, but also they have a responsibility themselves to see what they can do to be that too. So, and then resilience and tenacity, as I've said, it's the best you modules that we cover off. So we've got that set clear pathway of those 4 groupings of those modules, and it's great actually. And every one of our trainees praise it. They do it whilst working as an assistant, but at the end of those 6 or 9 months, they are then able to fee earn on a very small number of cases. We look at around giving them 10, so they settle into to know how to become that fee earner.
I mean, it's interesting to hear you talk about the training covers off, some of those resilience
Yes.
traits as well. I mean, can you train that? That feels like it's innate.
You can actually, you can grow somebody's confidence, and that's confidence in knowing what you do and how you do it. It's confidence in knowing that you can ask questions of your senior management team, of your conveyancer. It's having confidence to be able to say no sometimes to a client, to an introducer, to me even, to say, hang on, I need some space, I need some time. And all of those things build up that resilience to be able to say, I can deal with this, I can cope with this, I can put this aside and actually just think, I need to give myself 5 minutes to be able to move on and not crumble, because conveyancing is constant pressure, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. What about people skills? I mean, one of the things that I often think about, and through my own academic journey as well. I mean,
Yeah.
I did a history degree.
Mm-hmm.
Taught me very little about conveyancing or wills and probate. I must admit, a lot of that I've learned along the way. But, I remember very vividly going into my first job and just not having people skills or an understanding of people. And that's so critical to conveyancing, isn't it? I mean, we don't set people up for success in that sense, do we?
No, we don't. Again, I think we've kind of recognised that those people skills are imperative in the success of really, I suppose, any profession, but certainly in conveyancing, when you're having to deal with such a wide range of people. So it's your clients having to look after them, it's your introducers of business having to have that best relationship you possibly can, having to have good relationships with each other, because actually you are relying on each other as a conveyancer or an assistant or a manager to be able to get through that day together, to get through that week together, and to be able to effectively communicate. Again, it goes back to, if service comes down to communication, and communication comes down to people skills, and we've kind of noticed that ultimately that is while it's certainly required in being the best that you can be and providing that best service that we want to, certainly at Convey Law.
I was at a conference recently, and one of the sessions was about the next generation of talent.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And there's some really frightening stats about this new generation, particularly around interpersonal skills.
Mm-hmm.
And I forget the statistics exactly, but a sizable majority of them don't like picking up the phone.
Oh, yeah.
They don't particularly like responding to emails.
Mm-hmm.
That's in a business like ours, like as you've highlighted, so interpersonal.
Yep.
That feels like a real challenge.
It is a real challenge. It is a real challenge. But if you've got colleagues who are like that and of that generation, you also have clients who are the same too. So we are finding that more and more clients are not wanting to pick up the phone either. They're wanting apps, or they're wanting an email. And if I think of myself, really, with my working hours, I generally don't want to speak to somebody throughout the day because I'm just too busy. But ultimately, I want to be able to email in my quick 2-minute break whilst I'm having a cup of tea. And we're finding lots of clients are like that, and so be it with introducers. But it's knowing when you do need to pick up that phone and having the courage to do it, which is what we're finding with some of our colleagues, in that, if you feel something is rumbling on a transaction, it's kill it with a telephone call, because as soon as somebody hears your voice and they feel confident and secure in what you're saying, then you've resolved what was potentially an issue. And again, we train on those types of things. It's knowing. But yes, you are right, Dave, and those stats probably are frightening, because I can imagine what they're like. And it's something that we're thinking about all of the time in terms of, the evolving business.
Say hello to Moneypenny. We're you when you can't be. Answering calls and qualifying leads, booking appointments, updating your case management system. We handle it all just like you would, with brilliant people, AI, or both. Visit moneypenny.co.uk today.
What do you say to people who would perhaps level the accusation that what you do in the scale of business that you are is train people in your way of conveyancing, rather than train people to be a conveyancer?
I'm glad you put that to me, actually. I'm quite old-fashioned in that, sort of going back to that pathway that I've looked at and sort of created with other directors of the business. I want all of our conveyancers to be conveyancers, in that they know how to open a file and they know how to close a file, and they can convey that property from start to finish. I know that there are other large businesses, and I've interviewed candidates from those businesses where they've only done certain parts of a transaction. We don't operate like that at Convey Law. Yes, we do have background teams who assist with certain elements, but our trainees are taught and are trained how to open a file and how to make an application for registration on completion and be able to close it effectively with a clear ledger balance. I'm a big advocate for them to know how to do everything on file. And I can't see us, for as long as I'm at Convey, us operating now any other way.
Earlier on in the conversation, you talked about the role that culture plays in training and in an organisation as well. And I know that it's a big part of Convey Law as well. But and don't give me the sales pitch, but give me the practicalities of what you as a business do to ensure that culture is embedded into the staff, rather than it being an ethereal piece of paper on a wall or something along those lines.
Yeah, okay. So, ultimately every business has a why. So obviously the Convey Law why is to, revolutionise conveyancing and be the best at what we do, and kind of help and support and share best practice with others. But how do you do that? So you've got the why, but how do you fulfill that why, really? So we've come up with a number of cultural principles. There's 6 of them which have actually become real life to us. 6 principles. One has been service. So service to each other. How do we be kind to each other? How do we help each other? How do we get the jobs done? But service to clients, to introducers. Giving, obviously, outside of our charitable endeavours. It's giving oneself to each other as well, sort of 2 minutes a day, 4 minutes a day. Kaizen, constant improvements, small improvements. How do we make small improvements to make it better, to make you better, to make processes better, to make the business better? Belonging. How do we all belong? To another one of our principles of tribe, we call it tribe. We're a tribe. We're not a family, because we can choose our tribe. We can't choose our family. And how do we belong to that? And then ultimately we do all of that by having fun. And that's our happy days, where everyone comes together for 2 days a month and we do training. We have lunch together, Convey pays for it. And then we have our philosophy, which sits under those principles of choosing your attitude and playing. And that's not childish behaviour, but just enjoying each other's company. And it's being present, listening to somebody if they're talking to you, and just making somebody's day. And that's by saying, you look nice today, or actually that piece of work is fantastic. And it's really, really lived. It's not just, as you say, written down on a piece of paper. And it is something that I have certainly noticed that has become real life for us. And it's certainly helping us to retain our staff.
Thank you for that. I want to move on and quiz the sort of managing director of a law firm element of your role, and talk about what you see as some of the challenges facing conveyancing at the moment. We were chatting before we started the recording. I know that you've responded to the consultation, for example, but you don't see that the consultation identifies or really tackles some of the key things that we as a profession face. So yeah, I'm kind of interested to hear where you think the government needs some direction.
Yeah, I suppose that the major one for me is the ongoing due diligence expectations of conveyancers, and the consultation doesn't address that at all, really. I think there's a section on AML, if I remember rightly. It was before Christmas, wasn't it? There's an AML section where, perhaps we should be sharing AML results much earlier on. I think that's about as far as it went with due diligence and expectations. We are expected to be forensic analysis of source of funds and proof of wealth, without being given any real guidance by the regulators on what their expectations are in that respect. It's all down to one's own judgment, which is fine. And we have put processes and procedures in place to be able to deal with that accordingly. I think in our transactions, there's about 9 pinch points where that is discussed and assessed. And to be a conveyancer, you have to be a risk assessor even outside of the law these days, which is something I never had to contend with when I first qualified back 25 years ago. And we talk about timelines, for example. And no doubt, absolutely no doubt, to those 2 things, source of funds and proof of wealth, add on time to a conveyancing transaction. And AML results, of course, they will only take you so far. They will look at the source and they will provide evidence of that source, but actually, where's that proof of wealth that sits behind it, which is the more difficult part? But it just hasn't been addressed at all. It's the HMRC now, in the last couple of weeks with regards to the tax advisory position. My thoughts on that are really question mark. It's maybe that's a little bit personal, but I've looked at it and I just can't see in any way, shape or form how it's deemed to be a good thing. I think it was imposed to higher the standards, but higher the standards of what, really? In terms of tax advising, we are certainly not tax advisors. We've never held ourselves out to be tax advisors. Stamp duty land tax is a personal tax, and technically the clients are telling you what tax they want you to pay. It's not the other way around, and no matter how you word it in your documentation, it looks like we're having to register, or we're going to have to use third parties to assist us in that sort of post. I think it's the 18th of May we have to register by, is it? But we've had those conversations in the last few weeks, and that, I know the consultation paper didn't even touch on that, did it? But that's just another thing that's come in which has kind of not helped at all. And technology, look, I am a great believer in using technology as an aid to assist in our transactions. Absolutely. I'm right there with any kind of AI that can progress and move it forward. But there has to be some joined up thinking with it all. And we are not seeing that anywhere throughout the industry. Everybody is creating their own products and hoping that it will bring it all together. But I don't see that. And I go to lots of events, and these companies, it's great that these products are becoming available, but until such time that we have accepted electronic signatures, I've been part of the Land Registry Forum for years, and electronic signatures have been on that agenda every time we meet, and there is nothing new being ever said. And it's just disappointing, because if we have a consultation from the government, actually they need to be looking at their own kind of departments to see how they can move this forward. I'm not saying you have to take it out to consultation, of course you do, but there were some real missives, I think, in that paper that they just didn't even touch on, which I think where the real delays are in property transactions at the moment.
It's interesting to hear you talk about source of funds and source of wealth. I mean, that's come up in quite a number of conversations I've had recently, and it will be even more interesting to see how the transfer of that regulatory responsibility to the FCA pans out. My suspicion is that the FCA will be much less flexible than the existing regulators, and probably much more hardline as well. But
perhaps that's a good thing, because at least then we know perhaps that's where we will know where we stand then with regards to that. And I think we kind of sit between them and the regulator at the moment, and we, as I said, we have to use one's own judgment to think, okay, that all makes sense to us as an experienced conveyancer, that that person, source of funds and proof of wealth, we're happy to accept that and run that risk, because it's a risk. We recently had our CLC audit, and the majority of that was on source of funds and AML and proof of wealth. So it's big on their agenda, of course.
Mm-hmm. And it has a huge impact, presumably, into coming back to the training element of what you
Absolutely.
do. And coming back to that point that we talked about, the time that you invest in understanding, land law and transactional and all that kind of stuff, and then time and effort invested in all the sort of ancillaries that sit around it and the risk and compliance.
Absolutely. It's as big as, if not bigger than those academic modules at the moment, because that's where the risk to the business is, and that's what we have to cover off, and that's where our insurers are interested, and our regulator, of course. It's huge, and we train everybody within the business on AML, irrespective of your position, because we feel that everybody needs to have a basic understanding of it. And then depending where you sit will depend on the level of education and training you get in connection with that. But yes, we're having to think about it all of the time, and you can't sit still with it. You really can't.
At the risk of ending the conversation on a downer, let's find out, I'm really intrigued to know whether you think there is a light at the end of this tunnel. We started this whole discussion by saying, would we recommend our children go and be a property lawyer or a conveyancer? And the truth was, we probably wouldn't. But is there, in your view, Janine, a light at the end of the tunnel?
There absolutely is, and look, as I said, I'm a big advocate for being a conveyancer if it's right, and if you get it right, and if you're in the right business and you have the right training. And I think there's lots of work to be done outside of a business with the government, with technology helping, but I think we can really get it back to where I started in it 25 years ago and thoroughly enjoyed it. I've obviously never left it, so that paints a picture. But ultimately, it's drawing those in that haven't had that experience prior to what it's like at the moment. And actually, it's recognition of fee earning as well. I think that's another kind of issue that we face at the moment in terms of challenging, what is our appropriate fees? We kind of drove ourselves to the bottom of the fee scale for some reason 15 years ago. We've never really quite recovered from that. So again, it's about teaching our young trainees that they have value in their time and value in their worth, and don't be frightened to charge for the appropriate work that you're doing, and be proud of what you are, be proud of being a conveyancer. And I will always say that I'm proud of what I do, and I'd like to think my 10 trainees behind me would be saying exactly the same. But there is work to do, and I think it's a lot of heads that need to get together. It's the likes of these kind of podcasts where we're listening to people, the foot soldiers on the ground, effectively to to get it to where it needs to be. It's not going to go away. People will always want to buy and sell a house. So it's going to have to come to a crescendo somewhere, isn't it?
Well, hopefully that is a slightly uplifting way to end the discussion, because it's challenging out there, definitely. But through National Conveyancing Month, of course, people can get involved, as we said, in raising their profile, in extolling the virtue of the role of the conveyancer in the transaction, because it's absolutely critical. To your point, people do not move home without one. So thanks so much for joining the podcast, Janine. Great to have had you on, and thank you for sharing your insights and thoughts.
Thanks very much, Dave. Thanks.
The Today's Conveyancer podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on todaysconveyancer.co.uk. My thanks to Janine. Thank you as ever for listening, and we'll see you again soon.